Okay, so in this video, I'm just going to show you some tips and tricks for using Cursor. This is a follow-up video to my MCP Cursor video and my PRD creation video. So I'm just going to show you how I'm using Cursor today. Cursor just implemented a new rule system. They're deprecating Cursor rules, which is kind of like the system prompt that gets appended to all of your conversations. And they implemented this new nested Cursor rules based on context. So I'm going to show you how I use it here, how it connects to MCP, and how to use project level MCP servers. So let's get into it. So first things first, I'm actually just going to show you the MCP servers I have running in Cursor pretty much constantly. And I play with other ones, but these are the ones I always use. And I'll just show you really quickly. So let's go to Cursor settings, MCP, the usual sequential thinking, Puppeteer, fetch, Brave search. Okay, browser tools. This is a really great MCP server. Essentially what browser tools does is it gives you a Chrome extension, and then basically you can debug live with Cursor. So Cursor sees your Chrome developer logs. You can read any errors. You can understand what's going on and take screenshots. It's a very powerful tool. It saves so much time. One thing I want to tell you about browser tools is that it doesn't play nicely with a Puppeteer MCP server. So what I find myself doing is when I want to use browser tools, I disable the Puppeteer MCP server. You can just enable or disable it like any MCP server within Cursor. Firecrawl is another great tool that I started using, and I generally use this when Brave and Fetch and Puppeteer aren't enough, but it's incredibly powerful and I could probably use it a lot more. Git, obviously, Git is in the global Cursor settings, but it's not really relevant because we just started a new directory, so it's not relevant here. It shouldn't look here. So that's why project level MCP servers are really important too. So we're going to do that next. GitHub as well, same story. Now I don't know if it's fixed, but when I was trying to use project level GitHub MCP servers, it wasn't working. Turns out it's a known bug. They may have fixed it in this latest version I just downloaded, but I haven't checked it out. So for right now, GitHub is in my global MCP settings, but I recommend and I plan on putting it in a project level on every project I'm working on. Because the first thing I want to do is show you how to set up a project level MCP server. I'm just going to do this with a blank slate Cursor project. And obviously you can do this within your own projects. I'm just going to do it from scratch. So what we do is you go here, period Cursor / mcp.json. Boom. By the way, I just did that with AquaVoice. Really cool. You saw how to set it up. Amazing. Okay, so in this situation, we're going to set up Supabase for this project. So it's an MCP server specifically for Supabase for this project because I don't want my global MCP servers all to look at the same database because every project probably looks at a different database. And by the way, every project probably has multiple databases. You could have production, you could have development. Right now, we're just going to talk about development. So I'm just going to paste in my MCP server for Supabase. And as you see here, it's just like the standard JSON MCP setup. It's MCP server, I call it Supabase, and it's a Postgres server. This is the Postgres server they give you in the Model Context Protocol reference servers. Now, the one thing I want to say about this is read-only. It could only query. And there are other Postgres servers or even Supabase-specific MCP servers that have the ability to not only read, but to write, and they're way more powerful. I'm just showing you here how it looks. We set this up in the .cursor mcp.json. So if we go back to Cursor settings and we go to MCP and we scroll to the bottom, we now see Supabase project managed. And all we have to do is just press enable and let's wait for it. Let's maybe refresh it. And there we go. It's green now. So now we're in the Cursor settings for MCP, and anything you added to mcp.json goes to the bottom as project managed. So this is super powerful. Now, if we go back here, you could add a second one for your production server. But then the question is, how do you tell Cursor when to use which MCP server to talk to which database? So next thing we're going to do is Cursor rules. Okay, so now we're back in Cursor rules. So the easiest way to add a project level rule is just pressing add a rule. You'll see up here you can give it a name. So the first one I'm going to put in is my MCP rules. So let's just call this, start over, MCP-tool-usage. As you see, it created a new file called mcp-tool-usage.mdc. It's now also under the .cursor directory for rules, okay? And so it's a subfile of the rules file under Cursor. So now what you can do here is you can say when it's triggered, always auto-attached, agent requested manual. Now here's what I really like about Cursor's new rule system. If you watch my videos, you know I spend a lot of time on custom instructions for Claude projects. I iterate on them. I make them very robust. I'm very liberal with my tokens. I put a lot of instructions in there and I fine tune them a lot because I'm not really worried about hitting the context window, and I could just start a new chat within Claude projects. And basically what I'm saying is that every time you use custom instructions or a system prompt, they get appended to the beginning of your chat. So basically, if you have really long custom instructions, your context window in your chat is going to get much smaller, much quicker. While I'm okay with that in Claude projects, in Cursor, it's a different story, because if you're working in Cursor, you know how frustrating it is when Cursor starts hallucinating, when it stops working. And it happens a lot because you're not just chatting with it, it's doing a lot of operations. It's hitting that context window a lot faster. So Cursor's new rule system, where it's like nested rules based on context and based on situation, pretty much solves that issue. Now, because you can give multiple rules that won't always be looked at on every chat or every conversation, you can make it do that by setting it to rule type always, but you could also do auto attach, agent request, or manual. So there's many other ways of doing this, and this can be configured differently for every single MDC file. I'm still iterating on the best way to do this, but I find this very powerful because you don't have to give it all the context of your rules every single time. You can have it triggered when you're using a specific file type. In this video, I'm keeping them always on, but you can change that based on your use case. One other thing I want to say is that unlike Claude projects where I give them very detailed custom instructions, here I try to make them concise and to the point because I don't want to lose focus and forget what the point is here. So I'm going to put some boilerplate instructions in here just to show you how it works. And by the way, Windsurf hasn't implemented this. The last time I checked for Windsurf, it's still just a global Windsurf rules right now. So here's my MCP tool usage. We have sequential thinking, pretty much telling it use sequential thinking all the time for problem solving, for troubleshooting, debugging, planning. Avoid recursive calls, trigger intelligently. I say for information gathering, use Brave Search, Puppeteer, Firecrawl. I tell them when to use them. Browser tools. This is more of a personal thing. I say acquire user confirmation. Don't trigger it by yourself, because as the user, you have to make sure you're using a Chrome browser, and you have to make sure you started the server itself, not the MCP server, the server for browser tools. And I also say remind the user to disable Puppeteer before attempting to use. I tell it how to use the GitHub MCP. Let's add another one. Let's do documentation and tech stack. Enter a new MDC file. I'm gonna keep this on as always as well. I'm just gonna paste in my boilerplate. Okay, documentation usage. Always consult the project's prd.md. That's what we created in the last video. Review all additional documentation files within the docs directory provided within the project. So I will add more than just the PRD. Sometimes I'll add a software development plan. Sometimes I'll download documentation for specific APIs or SDKs I'm using. I like to have it all in the project itself, so it's easy reference. I can just tell Cursor to look at it. Here I'm telling Cursor, hey, you might have extra documentations, but if you don't, I say, if additional or updated documentation is required, use the MCP servers, Brave Search, Puppeteer, Firecrawl to locate official and current sources online. And you can also have it downloaded and save it to the directory. And then technical stack compliance. Now, I added this here because I found sometimes I'll be working on something and I'll have Cursor try and fix it and debug it, and it'll just use something completely different, a different library, a different storage structure that I wasn't using in the project itself. So here I say just adhere strictly to the project's established technology stack. Do not introduce new technologies unless explicitly instructed and justified. If you're going to take this, I suggest adding your tech stack. I like to put it all in here so that Cursor knows this is what I'm using. Okay, let's create another one for Supabase. Let's call this one database-rules. Okay, I'm just gonna fix this manually because I don't got time. This Cursor rules, we're gonna talk about Supabase, the project-based MCP server. So here I just say Supabase Postgres MCP development only. Now, if you are running a project with those development environments and production environments, you could, for example, also add instructions on when to use your production level Supabase server here. And you could pretty much say, okay, for this scenario, use the development, and for this scenario, use production. So I'm not gonna get into that right now. It's a little bit more advanced, but if you're already running both development and production, you probably have an idea what I'm saying here. Okay, lastly, and most important, coding best practices. And for whatever reason, it's doing everything in lowercase. Coding best practices, all lowercase. That solved it. Awesome. I love AquaVoice. More or less, I have coding best practices, do not modify code or UI elements that already work, because I can't tell you, I'm sure you know this, how many times I'm working on something that works fine and there's a little thing that needs to be tweaked, and all of a sudden the UI is different or the whole code breaks. So I'm saying don't change what you don't need to change pretty much. Another thing I say with Cursor, it duplicates existing functionality often. So I say reuse what already works. This is kind of a funny one, but I found it worked better when I said never unintentionally delete data or code. If it's unintentional, then why would I do it? But anyways, never unintentionally delete data or code, confirm explicitly before destructive actions, commit frequently, always ask clarifying questions if tasks or requirements are unclear, and then user interface, never change or affect the UI unintentionally. Again, only alter UI components if explicitly instructed or clearly part of the assigned tasks. Sometimes, as you see here, I will be redundant. I will reiterate the same thing in multiple rules just to make sure it doesn't change things. The last thing I want to do is show you what I do when I create documentation. So I create a new folder, usually called docs, and let's put the PRD from the other day in there. So I'm just going to drag my PRD into there. This is the PRD we created in the last video. So now let's just use cursor agent. The way the rules work now, you shouldn't have to tag them in cursor agent. It should know to use them intelligently. Okay, so what I used to do was take my PRD and run it through a separate Claude project that would break down the task, the development into steps, very granular steps. But what I've been doing recently is just using cursor agent to plan it as well. So let's just do that right now. Oh, by the way, I just saw an issue. Hold on. We don't want docs in .cursor. We want docs outside. So let's move it. Okay. Based on the PRD, create a software development plan with actionable steps on how we will go about building this YouTube extension. Now let's see if it chooses to use sequential thinking off the bat. And there we go. Amazing. So we see it's already using sequential thinking. In the past, I found that you have to tell cursor to use MCP tools, but because we built it into our cursor rules to use sequential thinking whenever planning or debugging, it called sequential thinking multiple times. Very cool. Let's look at the development plan. Phase 1, project setup and foundation. Okay, this is really cool. I usually iterate on it, but I just want to show you my next steps usually. So now I'll say, add this to the docs directory as softwareplan.md. Let's see if it does that. Very cool. So let's just open that up. And there we go. So this is just my basic flow. Obviously, it gets way more intense than this. I use other tools like deep research for understanding the market and the competitive landscape. I use a Notion MCP server for product management and project management, 21 Dev for creating UI. So there's so many other things you can do here, but I just want to show you my basic workflow. If you want to see any of these other things in more detail, let me know. The tool I've been using in this video is AquaVoice. It's very useful for vibe coding or any dictation. As you saw here, it was extremely capable within cursor. It knew the context of what I was working in, how to structure whatever I was saying, and it also was able to self-correct. I'll drop a link to AquaVoice in the description below. The cursor rules that I put in this project right now are very boilerplate. I can drop them in my GitHub repository. I suggest iterating on them yourself. There may be better ways of doing it, but this is what I'm doing for now. I find that I'm able to get to building and testing a lot faster, so the iterative process moves a lot smoother. I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something. If you have any tips or tricks or things that I should try, write them in the comments below. If you found this video useful, do me a favor and like the video. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps me grow. Thank you for watching and have a great day.